from the Ticats Audio Network, this is the CFL This Week with Bubba O'Neil.
A major upset in one of the division finals sets up a first-ever clash for the Grey Cup. Brady Oliveira continues to rise the stock value of running backs. Hey, who deserves credit for the Alouettes' 2-month undefeated streak? And we're seeking your favorite Grey Cup memories. Hey, and a winner as well, too. Welcome to the CFL This Week on the Ticats Audio Network. I'm Bubba O'Neil. Hey, if you're a veteran, thank you for coming back. And if you're a rookie, yes, you have hooked up to the #1 podcast for CFL talk and opinion with the nation's top broadcasters, analysts, and columnists. Now, speaking of, let's introduce this week's outstanding trio who all kind of hail from the sidelines of the broadcast booth. He is the longtime and Hall of Fame voice of the Stampeders on QR Calgary. Mark Stephen, always a pleasure to have you.
Glad to be here.
You know, in Ottawa, he certainly does have the reins of the voice of the Redblacks, and he does so much in the nation's capital. AJ Jakubec, always a pleasure for you to check in with us.
Always a pleasure to be here, Bubs.
And I seem to believe that he's increased his profile. We've seen him a lot on the TSN desk moderating the panel. But I always say no one does a better job monitoring the sidelines on game day. Matthew Scianitti from TSN, always a pleasure.
Bubba, you're too kind, my friend. Good to talk to you.
Thanks for joining us. Let's attack this week's topics. I'll start with Mark Stephen here. Argonauts lose to the Alouettes, 16-2. Is it official? Is it a curse?
Well, I hear the 16-2 part because the other time it happened, Edmonton was upset by Saskatchewan. I think more than strictly a 16-2 record, although that's certainly a shock to see a 16-2 team go down. It's when one team gets so far ahead of the pack and then cruises into the last few games with, you're juggling the lineup, not a lot to play for. A lot of 15-3 teams have gone down too, so it's really tough. The Argonauts are the latest in a long line of teams that have struggled with that once the, clinching game is held and you try to juggle it down the stretch. So it was tough for them to come back after so many games that just didn't have a lot of impact on the standings, and Montreal caught the wave. So I guess you'd call it a curse. I'd call it the clinch early curse as well as a 16-2 curse.
Matthew, you were probably right there on those Argos sidelines monitoring the sort of attitude, the emotions that they were riding up and down for 60 minutes. Did they fall victim to a curse?
I have never experienced anything like I experienced in that third quarter, Bubba. I was, the first interception was very similar to a pick that Chad Kelly threw when they were in Edmonton and faced the Elks earlier in the season. And it seems to be the classic American mistake, which is you don't account for the 12th guy in that free safety position. He comes underneath, and then he takes it to the house. And I can understand that. I can understand nerves. He's a human being. But that third quarter, to watch some of those passes, to watch some of the decision-making, Chad Kelly has had an incredible season. You cannot deny that he's talented. He has a high-caliber arm. He will be successful in this league. It was one of those moments, though, where, and in a playoff game, I haven't seen it, where someone clearly wasn't seeing what they wanted to see, and it was. I'm not a fan of teams or have any affiliation other than I have good relationships with the players and I love huge moments. But that was the first time I looked at a player on the bench and Chad Kelly was just kind of looking into the middle distance, and I thought, I wonder what he's feeling in front of 27,000 people who came to watch the Argos beat the Alouettes. And everyone in that stadium felt that the Argos were going to win, and not by a little bit. So I spare a thought for Chad Kelly because there was a lot of attention on him. I mean, Chris Berman on Monday Night Football was talking about it, and ESPN has been talking about it because Chad Kelly this season, he turned a lot of heads in a lot of ways that the CFL wants someone like Chad Kelly to turn heads, especially coming off of we all saw the Chad Ochocinco comments and seeing the level of play and the rise in ratings that we've seen throughout the season. This felt like a huge moment for the Toronto Argonauts. And I don't fault their defense because their defense kept them in that game. I don't fault AJ Ouellette. There isn't anyone that I look at and say it's your fault. And I don't necessarily think it was Chad Kelly's fault. What I think happened, to go to your point about curse, I think this team felt that they had it all figured out and they were waiting for somebody to do something. And if I, having been in many situations and observed nearly everything on the sidelines, in that moment, I would have expected either a player, and I've seen it before, or a coach to pull all the team together and say, we know who we are. Let's stop messing about and let's get to work. And that didn't happen. Somebody was waiting for someone to do something, and all that was happening in that third quarter was Chad Kelly throwing interceptions, and that just put the Argos in a real bad position.
AJ, be honest with me. We, the four of us, have covered amateur and professional sports at all kinds of levels, and anything can happen. We all know this. But did you, at any time, I think you watched the game at home, did you believe that there was a 1% chance that the Alouettes were going to beat the 16-2 Argos?
Yes, because of history and because of adversity. I've seen it firsthand. So I called games for the Ottawa 67s going back to 2003 and 2019, led by Andre Tourigny, and we see what he's done in the NHL with the Arizona Coyotes. They started 14-0 to the playoffs. Then they lost their first game against Guelph in Game 3 of the OHL final, and you could just sense that they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to handle that adversity. They ended up losing that series in 6. And all you have to do is look at history. 73-win Golden State Warriors record, lost to the Cleveland Cavaliers and LeBron in the final. 116-win Seattle Mariners, that's my team. Back in 2001, couldn't get to the World Series. Still haven't been to a World Series. Boston Bruins last year, 135 points. Couldn't get out of the first round. And then you look, New England Patriots, 16-0, and they lost to an inferior Giants team in the Super Bowl that year. Let's just look at the CFL, for example. You look at the 60. I was there in 1989. I'm from Edmonton. I was there at the Western Final. They had no business losing to that Saskatchewan Rough Rider team back in 1989. And they faced some adversity, and they just couldn't handle it. And that team, led by Tracy Ham and Blake Marshall and all the great players that they had, they floundered, and Saskatchewan ended up winning the Grey Cup. But not only that, look at the 5-year dynasty Edmonton teams. In 1981, they finished 14-1-1, and they almost lost to Ottawa. They were down 20-1 at halftime and needed a field goal. They needed a controversial call. I was 6. That's the first game that I remember watching. And I don't remember about double pass interference, but I got to Ottawa in 2003, and that's everything everyone wanted to talk about was double pass interference. They needed, quite frankly, a terrible call to go in their favor. They ended up winning the game. And, Mark was there. I was there. Matthew was there on the sidelines. 15-2-1 Calgary Stampeders against the 8-9-1 Ottawa Redblacks. And the Redblacks came out early, and the Stampede, look, that game could have gone either way. We're talking about a shoestring tackle from Abdul Kenna on Buckley, from that game changing to a Calgary win. But in the end, top teams, the best records of all time in this league, have not gotten it done when it mattered most. So I do think there's something to be said. Dave Smart, one of the best coaches in the history of this country. I've got to know him quite well over the last 20 years, now at Texas Tech as an assistant coach. But record amount of U Sports championships. And one of the things he always talked about, he always liked a loss. He had some teams, some of the teams that didn't get it done, and there weren't many over the last 20 years at Carleton in men's basketball. Some of the teams that ended up losing were the teams that didn't lose a game all season, because he always felt that if you lost a game, you had an opportunity to reset and go through some of the things. Where did this go wrong? And you can't control that. You don't want to lose if you're the coach, but it's just one of those difficult things when you go through a season like that and don't face the same type of adversity as, say, a Montreal did. When it comes to crunch time in a game like this, and all of a sudden pick 6, Marc-Antoine Dequoy, they didn't really know how to answer that. It felt like just from watching it on TV.
Yeah, and I'll fit this in very quickly. And that September 15th game was very significant for both teams. And I texted someone in the Argos front office when it looked like the Owls were about to win. And I said, this actually might be good for your team. And the Argos then pulled off, a quick comeback and were able to win in that game. And the front office guy kind of chirped back at me, playfully, mind you, a little bit. But I wonder that after that game, Montreal hasn't lost the game since, and the Argos had nothing to play for 2 months. I wonder if the Argos had lost that game, if the result on the weekend would have been different.
Mark, were you surprised, and we hear this a lot, when something isn't going well, that you fix it, or halftime adjustments, or Chad Kelly, and to Matthew's point, the TV cameras on TSN captured it beautifully. There were times where, I don't know how to put it, he looked empty. He looked lost, which we haven't seen all season long because of the success that he's had. Are you surprised that, again, because the team kind of offense at least didn't know what was happening, that the coach didn't sit the quarterback for a series? Watch, settle down, calm down. But he just kept sending him out there, and more things went wrong.
That's one of the great coaching conundrums, isn't it? The thing is, he played about 90% of the snaps this year. I know he started one game and finished a game here. But no, he's your guy. You got to ride with him. You got to hope that he can fight through it in a game like that. I mean, let's flip it the other way to the Bo Levi Mitchell. If you're going to pay a guy, if you're going to, invest that much in him, you better be prepared to let him fight through it. But it is a tough call, and I certainly understand it that there was sentiment that may have seen just step back for one series and see what's going on, get a different perspective. So, I guess I can see your point, but, Toronto's all in with Chad Kelly, and he's going to have to figure it out. And on this particular occasion, after a great regular season, he didn't figure it out.
AJ, so is the season a failure?
No, I don't think you can talk about a record season being a failure. All you have to do is see the fact that, to me, it's more than just wins and losses when you talk about the Canadian Football League. I talk about this all the time. If you're a fan, for example, of the Ottawa Senators, and you haven't won a Stanley Cup in 30 years. Is your life as a fan meaningless, or do you have a lot of memories along the way, moments that you can touch on that whether it's the Hamburglar run back in 2015 or beating the Montreal Canadiens in the playoffs in 2013. There's all sorts of different things that you can look at as a fan. For me, Toronto still had a record-setting season. There's over 26,000. To me, that's a big deal in that market because it's felt like the Argos have been irrelevant in that market over the last decade, and to see that type of support, I think is fantastic. The league needs a healthy and strong Toronto, and it's something to build on. So to me, obviously the end is a major disappointment for the Argos, but it's still a very successful season on and off the field.
Matthew, again, because of you being there, and I was at that game as well too, I generally, for Ticat games, I'm there about 3 hours before kickoff. This time I was there 2 hours before kickoff. I could not get a parking spot. I walked into the stadium, felt the vibe. Maybe about 5 minutes after kickoff, you standing on those sidelines for so many years, seeing this sort of struggle to get attendance, weren't you blown away with the atmosphere? And then for the end result, for so many of those people wearing double blue, for them not to get the end result, that's got to be a disappointment for the organization.
Such a strange thing, Bubba, because I started the game. I was there 2.5 hours before kick. I was there when Chad Kelly was out there first with Cameron Dukes, and they were stretching and going through just easy throws and kind of soft tossing and warming up. And I looked around and I said, today's going to be a special day. This place is going to be packed, and it's going to be packed with people paying to be here. The Argos, part of their staff, have mentioned before that, they've had similar crowds, but a lot of that has been comp tickets. And when I live right across the street from BMO, and I'm coming in and I'm seeing people, and I'm like, today's going to be special. This is really cool. And again, I'm not an Argos fan, but it was funny because I started congratulating a lot of people on the Argos, saying, this is a huge day. You guys have earned this. Enjoy it, embrace it. But it felt so premature because when Dequoy took that pick six back, everyone was kind of like, huh? Because that hadn't happened to this team. Sure, it happened earlier in the year, and let's be clear, Chad Kelly has thrown some bad interceptions earlier in the year, especially with pressure in his face. But it kind of was like the people there, especially those who were intrigued to come and may not have been or watched many Argos games, but saw that they were a good team and expected them to beat Montreal. there was a nervousness that started to go around, and almost people were perplexed. Like, what we thought this team was the best team in the CFL. We thought Chad Kelly was the best player in the league. And when they started to boo in the third quarter, which happens here, I'm in Hamilton. That happens in Hamilton once a game. Like if fans if they don't go for it on a third down, and the Ticats, even if the Ticats are down like 3 points, they'll boo. But it's a different kind of boo. The Ticat fans, they care so much that they're so invested, they're so involved. The fans in Toronto felt like they were sold a bill of goods that they're now being deceived. The way that the Argos played, the way that Chad Kelly was struggling, they were booing because they're like, we didn't come here to see a loss. We didn't come here to see struggle. We didn't come here to see adversity. We came here for a party. And before the game, there was such a bubble and such an underneath, you could feel that if the Argos took it to the Owls, and let's be clear, if Duquois doesn't take that pick six back and the Argos score in that drive, the energy in that place goes up immediately. And I'm not implying that the Owls would have lost. I think that would be very, very short-sighted, but I also know that for them, it would have been a lot tougher. It would have been a lot tougher to put momentum in, to gain any kind of foothold. But now that we know where we are, we know what happened, we know the consequences of Chad Kelly's mistakes, and we understand that it was a missed opportunity, it's going to take longer for the Argos to get back to that point. The Argos could have a great season next year. They could be 12-6. They could go to host the East Final again. I don't suspect there are going to be 26,500 people there. I think it'll be a good crowd, but that was a missed opportunity, and you could feel it at the end. That the disappointment was not only in the result, the fact the Argos were getting to the Grey Cup, and I agree, it's not a disappointing season. They built a culture. They'll be back. They're going to be a great team in the East for a while. But they missed an opportunity to gain a foothold in the market. I'm not implying to be on the level of the Raptors or the Leafs. That would be outrageous to say, with all due respect to the Argos and their history. But it would have been an opportunity where you could have possibly seen next year an average of 20,000 people there. You could have seen games where and in big games, big regular season games, maybe that pushes close to 25. You could have seen something, but it's going to take a long time to get back there. I still think that the Argos are trending in the right direction, and this could ultimately be the adversity in this culture building that they need, that the Stamps had before, that culminated in that 2018 win after losing in 16 and losing in 17. But when you're looking at it from a league perspective and an Argos perspective, missed opportunity.
And Matthew, I'm with you. That place was ready to blow up, and it just didn't happen. AJ, let's turn the tables though here. I mean, and it's only fair because this team, the Montreal Alouettes, they're going to the Grey Cup, right? They did an efficient job of taking care of the Ticats and really shocked the CFL with their victory on Sunday. Who gets the credit for the Owls' surge, late season surge here, to put them where many people had them ranked 9th at the beginning of the season, where this team was going to be?
Well, there's a lot of credit to go around. I'll single out 3 people. Danny Machocha, who, again, with my Edmonton ties, I know his first go-around as a general manager in this league didn't go very well. And part of that had to do with, in terms of the people that I talked to that knew the organization inside and out, he was trying to do too much. He wasn't delegating enough. So you kind of wondered, okay, how's he going to learn? How's he going to be as a general manager the second time around in the league? And, reading the stories about him having sleepless nights, not knowing if the Alouettes were even going to be around this year because of the ownership situation and losing players like Geno Lewis and Trevor Harris to free agency, where they couldn't even put in an offer because of just the ownership being in flux. So it starts there for sure. And he's the one who brought in Jason Moss. Jason Moss brought in Noel Thorpe. And those are 2 guys that I'm quite familiar with from their time in Ottawa. And you look at both of them, they've both been let go or not renewed twice in the last 4 years. Moss is a head coach in Edmonton, and then as an offensive coordinator in Saskatchewan. Thorpe was the defensive coordinator here in Ottawa in 2019, and then again in Edmonton after that. And so it goes to show that sometimes things don't work out and an organization maybe needs to make changes, but for example, I look at a guy like Kahari Jones and the resume that he built up before he got to Ottawa. It didn't work with the Redblacks. He's now out of work. Would it surprise me if I saw Kahari Jones running the best offense in the league in 2 to 3 years? It would not. Sometimes it's just the situation. And these are good football people. I got to know Jason and Noel really well, and I thought Jason did a hell of a job. He got questioned a lot about decision-making when he was the head coach in Edmonton before, but he's the best offensive coordinator that I've seen for the Redblacks going back to 2015 when he and Henry Burris put together a season where not only did they get to the Grey Cup, they ended up losing, but they won 12 games, which has never happened at Ottawa football before or since, and he was a big part of that. So I thought he did a masterful job with that team this year. I don't like the rule, the old punt at 1 yard and you get a first down like we saw, but they used
Nobody
it.
does, AJ. Nobody does.
But they used it. So full credit to the coaching staff. Doesn't mean it's friendly to the fans or anything like that, but those are the types of things that they did to win games this year. And then on defense, I saw it late twice this year, that Noel Thorpe defense, and they've got some players. They got some playmakers. You look at a guy like Reggie Stubblefield and what he did as a rookie in this league this year. It's been impressive to watch, not to mention bringing in guys like Sankey and Lemon, and that's a real strong group. But it starts with a coordinator, and for a guy who's been let go a couple of times, he showed he's got some tricks up his sleeve and that he can still coach. So well done to Danny Machocha, Jason Moss, Noel Thorpe, the entire coaching staff, and certainly the players. Everyone deserves credit for a situation like that, but I'll start with Machocha, Moss, and Thorpe as people that I think needed to be singled out.
What do you think there, Mark? What are you seeing?
Many of the same things. The team was ownerless for a while there. The league was running it, and as AJ mentioned, some high-profile, prominent people, Jake Weineke, Harris, Lewis, all took off and went elsewhere, and a big part of it was because of the uncertainty of the ownership, and they couldn't get a deal done with Montreal. I do want to also acknowledge Moss, not only for his football ability and football acumen, but when he went to Montreal, there was a lot of uncertainty about whether he had the temperament to be a head coach. Remember, he certainly had, shall we say, a fiery time in Edmonton for a whole bunch of reasons. Well, he's still a good coach, and he's still every bit as passionate. He's just, maybe a little more restrained and has more of the, shall we say, deportment of a head coach on the sideline. So I give him credit, and then let's give Machocha credit, too, for scooping up Darnell Sankey and Sean Lemon, and those, to me, were the two biggest signings in season by any team this year.
Matthew, one of the other names hasn't come up yet, and I'll throw them to you, but your thoughts, because I know you've gotten to know the man well, is Cody Fajardo. Like, this guy has... Those were 3 tough years in Saskatchewan. I mean, that is a really passionate fan base. You are celebrated when you win, and you have to answer the questions when you lose. And this is a guy that talked about not even being in football, and here he is on the grandest stage.
For SportsCenter, I think it's going to run tonight, I wrote a little piece. Cody Fajardo has been almost in this league for a little bit. You think about almost being considered the next guy, given the season that he had in 2019, almost getting to the Grey Cup with that pass that doinked off the crossbar. And almost being somebody that was elevated possibly to a level alongside Caleros. Maybe not Bo, but you think about, this is before Zach went to 4 straight Grey Cups and won 2 of them. But you're talking about a guy who might have been on the same level as Trevor Harris. Like, that solidly in that second tier of very good quarterbacks in this league. And then last season, he's on the bench. And I spoke to him last week, and he was talking about the tension that was in Regina. And to your point, Bubba, talking about retiring. And this offseason, he had a choice. He came to his own fork in the road. Was he going to be Chad Kelly's backup and go and play for the Argos and push Chad Kelly, which in hindsight might have helped Chad Kelly quite a bit, or was he going to go with a guy who believed in him, in Jason Moss, and by extension Danny Machocha? And Cody keeps saying this, and again, he said Danny Machocha watched all of my snaps. And he watched all of my snaps, and it showed me, on top of the 2-year deal that they offered me, that he was committed for the long term. And the one thing that I think Cody has wanted in this league is for people to say, good enough is maybe not the right expression, but that you belong. And I being alongside Jason Moss and this idea this season that they've built this culture about being great and an 8th Grey Cup opportunity to bring it back to Montreal and really embracing the history of the Alouettes, because to go back and talk about the last 13 years since Anthony Calvillo and S.J. Green and Anwar Stewart and John Bowman and then those incredible Owls teams that really were the team of that first decade of the turn of the century, and to know that they went the complete other way and had ownership problems and attendance issues and how many guys played quarterback for them and how many losing seasons did they have, and Jason Moss wiped that clean and said, we're going to build something that is based upon who we are, who this franchise has always been. And Cody Fajardo, I think, embodies that in the sense of, I'm going to prove myself because I know who I am. And sure, they didn't have to win on his back in Toronto. They're going to have to this week because the Bombers are not the Argos. And even though all of us pined for a Bombers-Argos Grey Cup so we could finally put to rest who the best team was this season, the fact is the Alouettes are here and Cody Fajardo is their starting quarterback. And for them to get to that third step that Jason Moss has kept talking about. First, they had to beat Hamilton, who were hosting the Grey Cup and had all the motivation to go back home and try for their own opportunity to win a Grey Cup championship finally. And then they had to beat the 16-2 Argos. And now Moss is talking about the third step. They have to beat a team that's been to 4 straight Grey Cups. Cody Fajardo has embraced all of that pressure and found success. And as I kind of end the piece off on SportsCenter tonight, everyone else has tried to define him as almost, and with that, he's been able to win and get this far. That means he really can do anything.
Let's go out west, AJ. It was like a grind machine. It was like watching Winnipeg find different ways to just kind of beat up and physically beat up the Lions. Were they exposed, or were just the Bombers the better team in this West Final?
Yeah, I think the Bombers are just – I want to just give credit to Winnipeg here because what they've done over the last 4 years has been nothing short of remarkable. 4 straight Grey Cup appearances. You win 2 Grey Cups. A third was oh so close, and now they're back in the dance again and deserve a lot of credit with what they did. You think of the first couple of years – with Kyle Walters as general manager and Mike O'Shea as head coach, they won 12 games. And the organization stuck with them, and it's paid off with 4 straight Grey Cup appearances, which we haven't seen since, again, the Edmonton Dynasty years of 78 to 82 when they got and won 5 in a row. So, yeah, it all starts in the trenches. The 9 sacks, the amount of pressures that group got. I mean, Vernon Adams Jr., I can't sit back and say that he had a bad game. He was running for his life in a game where clearly he wasn't playing at 100% because he was beat up. So give the Bombers credit there. And then their offensive line, keeping Collaros upright and just what they're able to do running the football with Brady Oliveira. Just a well-oiled machine. It starts in the trenches. It starts before that with, again, the stability they have and the continuity they have in management and with their coaching staff. And to me, they deserve full credit. And it didn't help that TJ Lee and Keon Hatcher ended up getting hurt. Brutal injuries early in that football game as well. That's not going to help. But, BC hung in there. They made it a game. And they kept it close for a long time. In the end, I felt that BC's ceiling was higher, but their floor was lower, whereas Winnipeg, typically not a team that's going to beat themselves. And Winnipeg brought their A game. For BC to win it, they would have needed their best game, and they just didn't have it on that day. But full credit to the Bombers, clearly the best team in the West, and fully deserving to go to the Grey Cup once again.
Mark, you've seen it all season long. You've called the games with Calgary, and this Bombers team, whether it's offense, defense, special teams, And then you add in the hostile crowd at IG Field. It almost looks like an impossible task. And I don't know when it's going to end.
Well, no question it's an impossible task. They've become sort of the marquee franchise in the league because, as you say, of the remarkable attendance, the remarkable success that they've had over the last few years. I did have an upset road team winning in the division finals, just not the one that did win. I actually thought BC, based on their play against the Stampeders,
I was
on a roll. Yeah, I thought they had a shot. They didn't. Winnipeg was clearly the best. You do ask the question, when is it going to end? Maybe if we come back in a month, we'll have a better idea. But I'll say this, it's a great team now, multiple playing Hall of Famers on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers right now, but there is a heck of a lot of age there too, and somewhere down the line, they're going to have to sit down. When do you become experienced and when do you become old? And I don't know exactly where the line is. They do, but you look at many of their key players, they're 30, 35 and above. They'll probably win on the weekend. I think they're the favorites going in. But in the offseason, they're going to have to sit down and look at how they retool this team because, to me, this is just me, this kind of has a bit of a last hurrah feel to it with some players that are inevitably going to move on. But time will tell.
But Matty, isn't that one of their strengths during this run is that their ability to plug and play has been so efficient?
I think so, but the root of what we're seeing in Winnipeg is Ryan Dinwiddie in Toronto talked about great teams. Coaches don't need to go in the locker room and bang the board and really go ahead and dictate to a team the alignment, assignment, execution. But you could tell when the Argos were struggling against the Alouettes that they needed someone to do that. The Bombers are completely different. Like Mike O'Shea will tell you again and again that he allows the players to really not control the locker room as much as take ownership of it. And what I have found so fascinating over the last 4 years is less about the plug and play and more about the communication level that guys had. The Bombers lost here in Hamilton this season, and I walked up to Willie Jefferson, and nobody was disappointed in that locker room. They were kind of like, yeah, you know what? Today wasn't our day. It happens. Like it wasn't like dismissive, and they weren't like aloof about it. They were just kind of like, hey, you win some, you lose some, we're good. We'll be fine. And he kept on talking about, offense, defense, special teams are going to get back. We're going to talk to each other. I think the one warning sign that we got maybe of how much longer this could possibly go on for was earlier in the season when they got bossed by BC. And Mathieu Betch is running right through the offensive line. And you could see on a day when a team has a certain desire and energy level that the Bombers, because they are inevitably getting older, because it is just time is their ultimate enemy, that there are going to be moments where they're not going to be perfect. But then you've noticed throughout the season, I specifically think about that, later on against BC in that critical game that essentially decided who would host the West Final, that third down stop, and Winnipeg finds a way to excel in those moments. And yes, Zach Collaros hasn't had the best season, not the MOP caliber season we saw in the past 2 years, and he's thrown interceptions and had games where he doesn't look as efficient and confident as we're used to seeing him in Buck Pierce's offense. But they got Brady Oliveira, and he'll take the pressure off of Zach, and he will be there. And Dalton Schoen is injured, but we know that this team will deal with it. And you have this confidence, like, yeah, the Bombers are going to be okay. And that's not to be dismissive of the Alouettes, and not to say that this game is a foregone conclusion at all. But the culture here is so self-confident and comfortable that I'm not worried about when it's gonna end. I'm appreciating for what we're watching, because we're watching something that may never happen again. We may not see a team constructed this way. We might. I mean, the Bombers might reload. They might not be able to get back to the Grey Cup for a couple of years, and then find a way. Because Mike O'Shea, and I say this definitively, he could be a coach at any era in the CFL, and he would be successful. He has now elevated himself alongside Wally Buono, alongside John Huffnagel and Don Matthews, even though he kind of wouldn't play into that, and that's O'Shea at his best. But that's who he is, and that's what he's built, and he's going to keep being successful. How much longer with this team, I'm not sure, but let's appreciate what we're watching, because these Winnipeg Blue Bombers and what they've built, and remember, before 2019, we were asking questions about Mike O'Shea and whether it was ever going to happen, because in that before time, the Bombers hadn't won a Grey Cup in almost 30 years. It's different now. This is the established franchise, and they have Mike O'Shea and his, hey, this is your locker room, take ownership perspective to really to thank for that.
Matthew, you brought up the name Brady Oliveira, and I know each one of you three has been on the CFL this week, and we've kind of touched on it throughout the season about his importance to the offense, his importance to the team, and it's extended into the fact of the MOP conversation. Mark, is he erased the notion across both leagues, and I'm talking about the CFL and the NFL, that the running back is this kind of interchangeable position? Because he certainly seems to have grabbed that mantle as the guy that is an important part that stirs the drink of the offense for the Blue Bombers.
I would say so. He's a guy that is very durable as well and plays an awful lot. He plays at a high level. He's got that bowling ball approach to him. He's a tremendous player that way. And, the offense runs through him pretty much in Winnipeg. So, I understand that running back is a very demanding position, and 5 years as a principal feature back is quite a run for whomever it is. But he's probably a little different in the sense that the offense is really running through him. So, we'll see how long it goes. Obviously, it's a bruising, demanding position, but so far he's looked tremendous. We should also remember that he backed up Andrew Harris all those years and learned there, and now Andrew Harris's career is done. So, he probably fought the odds as well and played as long as he did as well.
AJ, your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't want to take credit away from Oliveira. I don't think it changes the fact that it's still become like the era that I grew up in, whether it was a Jim Germany or a Mike Pringle or whatever it was in the CFL, or you'll look at Walter Payton and Eric Dickerson and Earl Campbell and all the great running backs in the National Football League. It was just a different game. And your running back was your feature player, almost more important than who you had at quarterback. And now I don't think that's the case, and we're seeing it around the league. I'm really impressed with what Oliveira has done to replace a legend and Hall of Famer like an Andrew Harris, and for them not to skip a beat. But with that offensive line, I'm not going to say that he doesn't deserve credit, but I also think there's enough running backs out there that if you find somebody, you probably would be able to plug and play. Just the nature of the game, and that we're seeing that across all levels of football, from college football to the NFL, and certainly in the Canadian Football League as well. But it is very impressive what he's been able to do, and the fact that they haven't been able to skip a beat.
To you, Matt?
Brady Oliveira, and what this Bombers offense continues to do impresses me, because you can't define what they are. I look at Brady and knowing what he's accomplished, and knowing the kind of player that he is, and knowing the kind of person that he is. This is one where it's so cool that he's a Canadian running back, because it means a little bit more. It means that passport, and they reject any Andrew Harris was the same, John Cornish was the same. When you say to them, oh, how good does it feel to be a Canadian running back? They'll say, the passport doesn't matter, you're a running back and American Canadian. That's nonsense. Brady Oliveira is a Canadian running back in the vein of Andrew Harris, in the vein of John Cornish, in the vein of Normie Kwong. These guys who run hard, and they're going to make you earn it. And you can see the way that Brady, even when he's catching passes, and you think about years and years ago when Andrew Harris talked about being an 1,000 guy, like he was like, I'm going to be that guy. It's because they want to run with purpose. It's because they want to impose their will on American defensive linemen, American linebackers, and say, you're in our league, and I'm going to make you earn it. And that's, to watch the way Brady plays this season. It really has been, it's been pretty incredible, and it adds a level and a layer to the idea that, like, skill position players, Canadians, it is so cool when they happen, because it doesn't happen that often. And the last time a Canadian, like when you think about the Canadians that have won the MOP, and Mark and AJ, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but after John Cornish in 2013, I believe the last guy was Tony Gabriel in the 70s. And there hasn't been a Canadian in skill position that's done what Brady is doing. And that's, or what John Cornish did, or what Tony Gabriel did. So it's one of those things where you hold on to that maple leaf a little tighter because you're like, wow, like Winnipeg's offense has looked at Brady Oliveira and allowed him to evolve to a point where this season he's the ultimate playmaker. It doesn't matter. Like the defense can shut down different aspects. They can shut down Zach Calero, so they can make it frustrating for him. And Brady Oliveira can take a game over if he wants to. And that is something that no other team can boast. And the Argos kind of did a little bit because they, when Chad Kelly was struggling, they could look at AJ Ouellette, and AJ Ouellette led the league in long runs. But Brady Oliveira can beat you in a number of ways, and I'm really excited to see what he does on this stage in this season because I really think, and I know Montreal's defensive line. When you look at Mustafa Johnson and Ugoak and Sean Lemon, like they're going to be ready. But that's the battle I'm looking forward to this weekend, Brady Oliveira against that Als defensive line.
Well, guys, we're all looking towards the Grey Cup and on Sunday. And, before we get to our winners, I know each one of you fine fellas have taken in and absorbed and been live to so many games throughout your CFL careers and love for the Canadian game even before we even grabbed a microphone. So, Mark, I'll start with you. You've probably seen the most out of all of us. You got a favorite Grey Cup memory?
As a broadcaster or just period?
Sure, just period. Period.
Well, I guess if you have to go way back, and I do, probably the best and most memorable for me, because it's the first one I remember, was the 1971 Grey Cup when the Stampeders won that, and then came back home, and the corral, now since demolished, was full, and it was very exciting, and it was a big civic event for day after day after day, and it was a very exciting time because they hadn't won the Grey Cup in 23 years. Turns out they wouldn't win another one for another 20 years, but I didn't know that at the time. And the other one that memorable covering, it was memorable, is the most recent one in 2018. Because they'd come off of two pretty catastrophic losses in 16 to Ottawa, in 17 to Toronto. I still haven't figured out how they lost that game, but they did. So this was a third straight crack to go back at it, and they badly needed a win, and they got it. And it was a real explosion of relief from the guys that had been there all through those different games. So I guess personally, 71, professionally, 18.
71, who did they beat?
Toronto.
Okay. That's her. Oh, the fumble. Is that the
Joe
fumble?
Joe Theismann's team. Yeah, right on the goal line.
Here's a quick reminder. The Argos never led in that game, so don't forget that. It's always the game that they lost. The game they never led in.
All right, Matthew, what about yourself? And it can be both, just professionally and something that sticks in your mind when you were much younger.
You know what? I can tell you this. AJ was there. The first time I got the privilege of covering the Grey Cup on the sidelines, Henry Burris got injured, AJ remembers, just before kickoff, and I was a ball of nervous energy because it's one of those opportunities that you never plan for, and I didn't really enjoy it because I felt so many nerves that game. But what really settled me and made me appreciate how lucky I am to do my job was the 2017 Grey Cup. I mean, in Ottawa, in the snow, certainly it wasn't great for the Stampeders that day, Mark, in the end, but it was just an incredible game. To see the Stampeders coming in as dominant as the team they were. The Argos were 9-9. Mark Trestman had kind of built a team that, to be blunt, they were doing their walkthroughs in what looked like a tennis court. It was essentially a cage on Dixon Road in Toronto. And you really talk about a team of misfit toys. They were like a team of like just guys who were trying to figure it out as they went along. And to watch that game in the snow just evolve into one of these just great moments. Maybe it wasn't a great game comprehensively, but it was just a great moment. To say nothing of Shania Twain and the dog sled. It was one of those things where it's just like, this doesn't happen anywhere else. This literally doesn't happen. This will never happen in the NFL. The NFL likes to go to warm tropic climates for their Super Bowl. This is us, and this is who we are. Happened to be in the nation's capital, but it was one of those moments where I sat, and the 3-minute warning is usually the time when we, Sarah and I would kind of give the vibe on the sidelines, And I took the country out of the break, and I was like, I've got the luckiest job in the world, man. This is incredible. Like it's one of those things where I pinch myself and say, like, sometimes you work hard, you get to a situation, but you have to sit back and be appreciative of the journey and where you are. And it was a real cool moment. And that for me will always be my favorite Grey Cup moment.
AJ, what about yourself?
So professionally, and 2015, 2016 were both really special, especially, when I moved to Ottawa in 2003, they had the Renegades. They didn't last very long. They lost their team for the second time, essentially in a decade. And you weren't sure, as a huge football fan, I wasn't sure if we were ever getting a team again. And so just as special as 2016 was, and as wild as 2016 was before the game, as Matthew can attest to with everything that was going on with Henry Burris, 2015 was really special just because they were back in the game for the first time in 34 years. And just the way it happened that week with 2nd and 25, Burris to Ellingson, just to get to the game, everything there was really special. From a personal standpoint, I'm going to go with 1993. It's probably not a great memory for Mark, unfortunately, but as someone who grew up in Edmonton and loved those great Eskimo teams in the early 80s, I don't remember the late 70s too well, but to get to my first Grey Cup as a fan, 18 years old, 2 buddies, jumping on the bus, getting to Calgary Saturday at noon after Edmonton shocked a dominant Calgary team in the West Final. We got to, you'd remember this, Mark, we got to Stinky's, the old sports bar in Calgary at about 12:30, and probably indulged a little bit too much, went to Spirit of Edmonton that night. I remember talking to the head of Spirit of Edmonton a few years back and saying the first Spirit of Edmonton we went to was 1993 in Calgary. And he said that was the wildest one. It was at the Sheraton. It was so jammed, people were dropping money from the top floor and they were throwing up beers from the bottom to the top. And I'm just like, wow, this is pretty incredible. This is what Grey Cup is all about. It's about the game for sure, but it's about Canadiana, fans getting together, having a good time, whether their team's in the game or not. And that was my first taste of it in 1993. The game, Edmonton won, and we ended up partying with a lot of the team after the game. Gizmo Williams was there, and a lot of Sean Fleming, and a lot of other guys were hanging around where we happened to be. So there were a lot of great memories about that. But to me, it was just about the entire weekend and what Grey Cup is all about. And that's just people in this country getting together to watch football. So, 1993, tough to beat that.
Matty, isn't that one of the most wonderful things? And I've been fortunate enough to see the games, Grey Cups outside of Hamilton and outside of Toronto, that anywhere you go, whether it be the West or the East, that it's people from all around the league. I don't know if you get that in the Super Bowl. It's such a corporate event, and then the home team and the visiting team. But this is every team have people. I mean, and you get that crowd from Baltimore that always seems to show up as well too.
The Atlantic Schooners. Don't forget those guys.
The schoon, isn't it the most wonderful unifying thing that we have? And I know hockey people love the Stanley Cup, but it's not always as Canadian as this.
You know what? AJ will understand where I'm coming from at this point. Having had the privilege of going and covering a World Cup and being there and understanding the enormity of it, it's overwhelming. It is so overwhelming that you can't even describe the level, the lights, the sounds, and it's a Super Bowl, but to another level. And I missed the Grey Cup last year, and I remember getting up and watching the highlights and seeing what happened and watching the Argos and Robbie Smith's fingertips and kind of sitting back, knowing it was in Regina, knowing that I hadn't been back to Regina since 2013. And I felt sad because as enormous, overwhelming, and incredible as the World Cup is, it doesn't have the intimacy of a Grey Cup. It doesn't have that where you walk around and you see people that you don't often see because, our country's so big and there is 6 month season, and like I only stay in the East. But to have gone and traveled our country and been to Winnipeg and Vancouver and Regina and Calgary and Edmonton and see the same people and hear the same stories and see the same affection for each other in this game, the Grey Cup is how we speak to each other. And that's something that you can't take for granted, because, and I've said this so many times over, we don't have a lot of things in this country sometimes, given our size, our distance, and let's just call it maybe our regional debates, that there aren't a lot of things that we share as a nation. This is it, and it's cool and it's special. And to know that millions upon millions of people in this country care, that's not insignificant. That's a lot of people, and we come here at, now it's going to be every second or third week in November after the schedule adjustment. We're coming together to just say hi to each other and to see old friends and to have a drink or to share a story and to share a laugh. And it really doesn't, it matters who the teams are, but it also doesn't. Like, you don't remember you remember a Grey Cup for moments. Yes, certain fans of teams will remember when their team won it and when their team was in it. But I remember it more as just a connection and collection of events and people who have an affection for each other, and really it's how the country talks to each other every year.
Well, on Sunday at its 6:30 kickoff at Tim Hortons Field, the ball will be kicked off. There will be a game. The Alouettes facing the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I mean, I guess it's the Alouettes there for the first time since 2010. Blue Bombers 4 straight visits to the Grand Championship. Mark Steven, who's your winner?
Montreal will give a really good accounting of themselves, but in the end, Winnipeg's depth and just overall level of talent will prove to be too much. They'll win by about 10 to 12 points.
AJ?
I'm taking the Alouettes. The one thing is, I'm not putting money on it, but the one thing about the Grey Cup is it's always close. It doesn't matter who's in the game. It always seems to be close, and I just feel like they got something special here. So my head says Winnipeg, because I could see them sacking Cody Fajardo 15 times with that defensive line and how dominant they are. But I'm just going with the upset. I'm going with the close game, and I do think if it's close, the Alouettes will find a way to win. So low-scoring game, take the under, going with the Alouettes.
Matthew, I know you're working the game, so I won't put you in that position of having to pick.
Thank you. I was about to say, I've got to be on the sidelines with these guys.
Yeah, I won't put you in that position. But can you give me a forecast of what you think you might see?
Absolutely. I was going to give you the old Kirk Herbstreit, where Kirk doesn't make a pick on a game that he's working. Because I'll give you a very quick funny story. The last time that I predicted the winner of a Grey Cup was 2012, and Mark, I picked the Stampeders to win that game. And because that was my first year covering the league as a newspaper reporter as a full season, spent a ton of time around the Argos that year. Scott Milanovich got wind of my Grey Cup pick, and when I went to congratulate him after they beat the Stampeders in the 100th Grey Cup, it's the only. I mean, I have a very good working relationship with Coach Milanovich. It's the one time he was not happy to see me. So it's one of those things where I kind of, ever since then, I've kind of put an arm's distance and been like, you know what, this is. My job is to talk to both sides of the ball and both teams at all times. So this is my forecast. I really do echo AJ's sentiments. I think the one thing I'm noticing about the Owls, especially over the last 2 weeks, is that there's this energy underneath and this sense of purpose that they have that is Coach Moss, and you can tell it in the way that he talks. There's this level of intensity, and he's so excited about his team and bought into all the individual personalities and what they do collectively, from the pickleball games they play in the locker room to the repeated intoning of history about the Alouettes and the 425 Bomber Squadron, and bringing one of the major generals of the Canadian Armed Forces, Darcy Molstead, to almost every significant game. They believe, and they really believe. And when a team has that level of belief, they can do anything. But they're going to need to make plays. And you saw last week what they were able to do to the Argos right away and in that third quarter. They won't get many opportunities against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to do that because the Bombers are not the Argos. As I mentioned, they're a well-oiled machine. So I really do think this is going to hinge on what Cody Fajardo told me last week. I will replace Bombers. I will replace Argos with Bombers. And the one thing Cody said was, they're not going to give it to us. We're going to have to take it from them. And the guy who's really going to have to step up in this game is Cody Fajardo, because he's going to be under a lot of pressure. And we know he takes a lot of sacks, and we know that he can deal with physicality. But at some moment, he's going to have to make a play, either with his legs or with his arm, for the Owls really to have a chance.
Oh, I'm all jacked up for the game. Why can't we just play it tomorrow, guys? I'll tell you. So entertained.
Whole media party. We're not a media party, okay? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's Grey Cup week. You got to enjoy the journey.
But I will say this. A real credit to the Grey Cup Festival. I'm in here at in Tim Hortons Field in the press box. It looks amazing. One amazing thing about every stadium is how it transforms for Grey Cup. Like it has the signage is certainly something, and the temporary stands and the temporary boxes they put in, but it gives that feel of big and important. And yeah, Bubba, I'm looking at Tim Hortons Field right now, and I really wish they could kick it off, man.
Yeah, I've seen the transition or the transformation of the stadium, and from a Hamilton perspective here, the 2021 game, because of the virus and pandemic, it was a game on steroids, right? You just didn't have all the events. The lead up to it wasn't like it is right now. But I will say the organizing committee, the care, just so much has been done. And folks, if you're out of this region or you're in this region, get down to Hamilton and enjoy this. For all the things that these guys have talked about, this is a spectacular week for not only Canadian football, but for Canadian sport. And you're going to enjoy yourself. So again, and I think this is the best part about it is always we're going to have an entertaining game at the end. So, as always, guys, here on the Ticats Audio Network, we're loaded with CFL chat and conversation, obviously leading up to the Grey Cup. We're also talking about the Ticats, what's going to happen as we get closer to 2024, all kinds of decisions to be made. As I always say, please hit that like and subscribe button, thumbs up button, give us the 5-star rating. We certainly appreciate and know that and happy that you're watching us. All three of these guys you know very well if you're listening or watching this podcast. Mark, Steven, if these people want to talk some football with you, how can they do so?
On the X, formerly known as Twitter, @MarkOnFootball. So send me stuff. I get lots of stuff. I enjoy interacting with fans about different things. So @MarkOnFootball. AJ,
nation's capital, always a pleasure.
Yeah, 4 to 6, TSN 1200, Monday to Friday. We do the drive, and we love to talk football, even in the off season. Redblacks radio show during the season, and then on X at the Super AJ.
Hey, by the way, how are you enjoying your new owner?
Yeah, I mean, there's been chaos, right? It's not his fault. It just seems like chaos never ends here off the ice. But I know he's going to bring stability, and so far so good on that front. I think he's going to be great.
Matthew, where can we find you?
At TSN Scianitti on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, at TSN Scianitti.
I just can't call it X. It's almost like a protest for me. I just can't do it. It's Twitter for me. Folks, anyway, hope you enjoyed this week's broadcast. Please enjoy the game. Be safe. Get down to Hamilton, enjoy the Grey Cup, and enjoy the festivities, folks. This is the CFL This Week. I'm Bubba O'Neil. Let's kick it off soon on the Ticats Audio Network.